I will hand over to Cordi, who will kick off the discussion. So please sit back and enjoy our fireside chat.
Thank you, Helen. Good afternoon, everybody. If you want to put your cameras on, please feel free to do so. And I think we're really hopeful for lots of dialogue in the chat. And we're going to have a conversation for 20, 30 minutes and then hopefully take a really good amount of time for Q&A.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to video this. So those who can't make it, but you want to pass on to friends and colleagues that you've enjoyed it, then we'll be promoting it as well. So I'm having a bit of a fangirl moment because Eleanor, absolutely lovely to see you.
Lovely to be here.
And so delighted that we've got this collaboration with Women in National Grid. And I think I first saw you on the stage at Powerful Women.
Yes.
Just over a year ago. And I thought, oh my goodness, somebody understands me.
Oh.
Somebody speaking my language about what it feels to be a midlife woman.
Yeah, a queenager.
A queenager. And this new definition that really made me feel pretty cool, actually.
Oh, good. Well, that's the plan.
And actually, every time I've sort of introduced the concept of queenager and talked about you, I think I see more smiles and delight from women sort of at the 50 plus category than ever. But for those who are new,
yeah,
it'd be lovely if you give us the Eleanor story and how you came up with this queenager definition.
Yeah, absolutely. So some of you will have seen me speak before. Others, this will be new. So my name's Eleanor Mills. I run a platform called Noon. That's as in the middle of the day, noon.org.uk. And we've partnered with you here at National Grid because what we talk about is queenagers. So I became interested in women in midlife because my background is that I'm a journalist. I spent 25 years at the Sunday Times. Some of you may have read the columns and the interviews that I did then. And then, as often happens to us in midlife, we kind of, sometimes when we're not really expecting it, we get what we call at Noon a midlife collision, which is when a whole load of things all kind of come together. And that for me was a mixture of being made redundant, my children going off to university, having quite bad COVID. But of course, everyone had a bit of a pivot at that point because the world really shut down. But I suddenly realised, and because I've been a columnist for a very long time, I realised that things that were happening to me tend to be happening to others, that this was a huge thing for women, that there was often big changes and shifts that happened in our lives at around this point, and nobody was really talking about it. And one of the things I knew from having been in the media for 25 years was that it became increasingly difficult to get articles into the paper or to get the stories of older women told in a kind of realistic way. That there were about 3 older women that we were allowed to see, kind of Judi Dench, because she's kind of cool and she's like in James Bond. And then there was like Miriam Margolyes because she's funny. And then everybody else was only allowed to be seen if they didn't really look like they were 50. So kind of, like Amanda, Claudia Winkle, all these kind of women who were like permanently young. But there are very few, in fact, some great, a good friend of mine called Nikki Clark, who runs something called At Your Age, did a survey recently, and most people could confidently name about 20 senior men that they saw regularly on TV programs. But when they were asked to do the same for women, they could only come up with about 6. So, I mean, I'm exaggerating a bit on the Judi Dench, Miriam Margolyes, but actually not that much. And that older women seem to disappear from the media, they disappear from our screens, they disappear from newspapers, and our stories are really not told. So as a journalist, I've been an editor for 25 years, I suddenly could see that there was this great big, the best ideas are the ones that are hiding in plain sight. And what I could really see was that there was not a space for women's kind of discussion and talk about women who are older. No, it's fine, don't worry, you're very welcome to me. We've got a guest join us. Yeah.
And Eleanor, what I thought was very really interesting about all of this that you uncovered was actually there weren't those stories, there weren't space, and yet it was a time in women's lives when their economic power, their life experience, their innate qualities are only on the up, right? I mean, you shared some facts.
We're big on facts. So yes,
phenomenal.
Yeah, so we can do that. So having been a journalist for a long time, I always like a data point. Probably we're all a bit similar here on that. And I was really interested in the massive dichotomy I could see amongst my female peers and my friends and the women that I looked up to, who seemed to me at 50 to be really moving into their power, kind of coming into their wisdom, coming into their experience, and the way that society seemed to suddenly kind of render them invisible. Yeah. And I thought, well, this is a disconnect which is really worth kind of drilling down into. And so the first thing we did is we did a huge bit of research where we discovered that actually women aged 45 to 65 are behind over 90% of all household consumer spending decisions. That's not 19%, that's 90% of all the decisions made about what households going to spend their money on. So it seemed to me bizarre that there we were, this incredibly powerful queenager kind of consumer. I'm really interested in talking about the queenager pound. And yet we appear in less than 10% of all advertising. So that for me is what I call gendered ageism in practice. So gendered ageism is where sexism meets ageism. And it's particularly toxic for women because we live in a culture which absolutely values kind of youth over pretty well everything. Yeah. And particularly for women, that really hits us. So I think that there's a really, and also we're a pioneering generation of women. There have never been women like us who have worked all the way through since we left, college or university or school, and we're still working at 50. There have never been a generation like this before. And we're the first generation who entered the workplace in equal numbers to men in the late 80s, early 90s, and entered the professions in equal numbers. And everyone told us, I remember when I first joined the newspaper, everyone said, oh, by the time, you're senior, by the time you're 50, it'll be equal at the top. Because of course you'd look up and it'd be all men. I remember when I first joined the Sunday Times, I would endlessly sit in news meetings and I'd be like, oh, okay, I'm not only the youngest person here, I'm the only woman. And that was just totally normal. They'd all turn to you and go, oh, Eleanor, what do women think about this? And you go, well, I'm not really all women, but I can tell you what I think. So there was a lot of that. I'm sure you had a lot of that too. So there was a sense that the older women seemed to disappear, just at a point where actually they became powerful. And that for me was interesting. One of the things I did while I was Genesis, I was chair of something called Women in Journalism. And so we were really interested in looking at what the media chose to cover and how they covered it, and what we call the kind of male lens of it. And that matters because I'm a great believer in the Obama thing of you can't be what you can't see. And I could see a whole load of women beginning to write themselves off because they were being written off in terms of the way they were being portrayed more broadly. So I decided that I wasn't very keen on that. And so I set up Noon to be a place where we told stories of becoming the women we wanted to be at 50. And we also started to really dig into some of kind of what was going on, really. And we also saw, for instance, this thing about advertising and women appearing in less than 10% of advertising, but being behind 90% of purchasing decisions. We found that 68% of women would be way more likely to buy from a brand that represents them authentically. Now, that for me I would have thought would be gold dust for loads of brands, but there's such a male lens, particularly in marketing and advertising, that kind of hasn't really permeated through. So it strikes me that there's a huge amount to do here. And the first thing to do was to kind of give us a bit of a rebrand in midlife. If you think about how older women are seen in the culture, Disney, it's always interesting just for the kind of the kind of paradigms it throws up. So if you think older women in Disney, evil stepmothers, wicked witches, old crones, evil kind of, evil fairies who kind of turn you into kind of something. And actually that's not true if you really look at the myths on which all those fairy tales are made of. There's lots of incredible older women. The Cailleach in kind of Scottish mythology is the land, or the women who weave the fates, the three fates, that women are controlling kind of life itself. Or the hen wife, who's in loads and loads of fairy tales, who is giving women a helping hand. She's the kind of friendly lady in the village who delivers your baby and tells you who you should marry, and kind of, so all those kind of more friendly older women personifying wisdom have been absolutely eradicated from our culture. So I really wanted to bring some of those back.
And what I thought, in addition, is you are a font of knowledge, which is so interesting as well. why I thought it was so relevant for National Grid was that, you know, you're at the height of your sort of spending power,
Yeah.
and the sort of share of the budget.
Yeah.
You're sort of searching for a positive identity that hasn't been promoted in the
Yes.
past, and yet you have buying power. And actually, you went through different dimensions of capability.
Yeah.
And resilience. You know,
Yes.
you've survived or lived through a series of critical experiences, typically, as you've got to become a midlife woman. And yet, we are and continue to see the risk of women leaving the workforce,
Yes.
or not being valued
Massive
within a corporate environment for this broader identity and set of skills. And when you look at the National Grid population, we're about 25% female. We would quickly look at the latest stats this morning.
Yeah.
Was over half of us are midlifers.
Oh wow, that's good.
So that's why, for you being here today and us creating something and a venue for such a big population of women in National Grid, just felt like, from a women in National Grid perspective, a really
kind of
cool thing to do.
Yeah, and almost like a no-brainer. I mean, that's why I'm so kind of stunned by this. It's why I talk about the male lens. It's like why I try to understand how we've got here. So I think in one way we should slightly let society and company off the hook a bit, which is this is really new. So 2019, which is only 4 years ago, is the first time where women over 40 start out earning women under 40.
Yeah.
So to unpack that a bit, that means that in the past, when women were in their, were in careers, they tended to stop or really cut back when they had kids, basically. And now we're not seeing that. We're seeing a lot more women staying in their jobs, staying in their careers as they get older, which is why as you get older, we're now out earning younger women. But think how recent that is.
Yeah.
So a lot of this stuff, and this idea of us as queenagers as a pioneering generation.
Yeah.
And again, in our research, over half of the women feel themselves to be pioneers.
Yeah.
And also, when we look up, we don't really see that many women who are like us.
Yeah.
Because we're kind of the first thing. And what that means is, in the same way that I've got two girls, I've got two kids, I know you've got two as well, that when we were the kind of the head of the arrow, the kind of tip of the spear, all the way through our careers in terms of driving parental leave policy or things about flexible working. I remember when I had my first daughter in 2002, I was allowed to take like 5-6 months maternity leave. And then by the time I had Laura in 2005, it had changed to a year. So we really were kind of at the cutting edge of those changes coming in. And so what I see now, I'm afraid, as queenagers, we're going to have to make the same kind of changes for women, at around kind of 45, 50, because there are things that we need. So the other thing that we really see in our research, we call the research forged in fire. And we find that queenagers are indeed forged in fire, and that over half of us have been to at least 5 massive life events by the time we hit 50, which often hit together. So I'm talking divorce, bereavement, redundancy, elderly parents. We were all, I spent Saturday driving up to Bromsgrove to see my ailing mother-in-law. A lot of us at this time of life are doing quite a lot of that. And also we've got teenagers who may be really, having a tricky time as well. We've got an epidemic of anxiety in Gen Z. So we're getting that squeeze in. It's really funny when I talk about this. It's this kind of, I call it queenager bingo. It's like divorce, bereavement, tick, that one. And then, of course, there's a bit of our own health issues, a bit of redundancy, some domestic abuse, all of those things, and menopause, which kind of comes into the mix. But I think that the menopause thing is actually, it's like a piece of the pie chart at this time. And I think that a lot of what are actually these broader kind of queenager issues, this midlife maelstrom, we call it, midlife collision, midlife cluster, something ruder if I'm not recall them, they kind of can derail us. But often those things which I call them pinch points, because that pinch of, a parent being ill, or say having dementia, or you having to kind of look after them, or a teenager being sick, when that comes, that's so overwhelming, and their need is so intense that we see a lot of women leaving their jobs. And then actually maybe a couple of months later, the poor person's died, or somebody's got better, or whatever, and the pinch point's gone. And then because of gendered ageism, it becomes much harder for women to get back in. Yeah. So we're seeing what I've termed a queenager brain drain. Annika Schmitz, who's the head of BNY Mellon and the global chair of the 30% Club, also, says that they're seeing that kind of all over the place. And we've got some numbers on it as well, that we see a real drop off at 50. I mean, I know that you've had some numbers that you are about 32% between about 40 and 45. Yeah. 45 to 50, it goes down to about 30%, and then, or 28%, and then it goes right down to 18% between 50 and 55. So trying to keep women in the workforce at that point, I think, is totally crucial, partly because we're all living longer. So part of the reason I called my organisation Noon was that in the 100-year life, 50 is only halfway through. So we're only at lunchtime. We've got the whole of the afternoon and the evening ahead of us. So I think that that's quite a good way to think about it. And also just financially, we're all going to be expected to work till 68 till we get our state pension, and probably longer than that by the time we get there. And the pension gap for women is even worse than the gender pay gap. The gender pension gap, women retire with 35% less in their pension pot. And so we really need to stay working between 50 and 68, because we also live longer. So if we're not going to have a lot of women having a very impecunious old age, we need to keep them in work, and the government does too. So one of the things we're doing, I mean, this whole queenager thing is really taking off. We're doing a big event at the Labour Party conference.
Oh, fantastic.
There, called the Queenager Ball on the Monday night, with lots of, because there's also loads of queenagers in the new cabinet. Rachel Reeves, there's Angela Rayner, there's a whole load of them. And so they can really see the economic impact of not keeping women in jobs between 50 and 68. And I'm afraid it's a mixture of this midlife collision and them falling out and not being able to get back in, what with the gendered ageism, which stops them getting hired, and a kind of lack of understanding about how longevity is going to change the workforce utterly, of which we're the kind of canary in the coal mine. And then I think there's also something else which my colleague, Dr. Lucy Ryan, calls the revolt, and which we see, Jennifer, my editorial director, is laughing. So the revolt is also that slight sense as we get a bit older of just going, actually, no, I'm not just going to kind of run away and shut up because you disagree with me on this. I mean, I remember when I was younger, I was very keen on being quite pleasing. And I kind of, wanted to do kind of what my bosses wanted me to do. And I think you get to a point at about 50 where you're like, you've
really?
been in that job for 25 years. I've won lots of prizes for journalism. And so I would push back much more and go, I don't think so. You may say that's a terrible idea. Actually, I've just won this big prize and people think I'm a good editor and I really think we should do this. And that aspect of women, really pushing back, kind of flexing their voices, shifting, we also see into a kind of more purpose, kind of a sense of, am I doing something which really aligns?
Energy efficiency.
Energy efficiency.
Okay.
We see in our research about 70% of the women going, I need to feel like I'm doing something that's worthwhile. I may have less, years under the bridge than I've had, and I want it to count. Whether that's in terms of going back to one's own original purpose, whatever it was one started out wanting to do, which life knocked off track, or that sense of, actually, I know what I'm doing and I'm going to stick to my guns. So we call that the revolt. And actually, it's what makes queenagers very valuable to companies, particularly in risk. If you're thinking about risk, I mean, I love Christine Lagarde saying, if we'd had Lehman Brothers, not Lehman Sisters, if we'd had Lehman Sisters, not Lehman Brothers, we wouldn't have had the 2008 financial crash because of the group thing. That actually what we need in business is a bit more, really, calling out that the emperor's got no clothes.
So let me sort of respond to a little bit of that. It's fabulous sort of interplay with where we are in National Grid, I think. So I don't think we're not wrestling with a gender pay gap. We've largely resolved that as an organisation. We're within single digit, income gap. We're not in a scenario whereby we don't have senior sort of female role models. In fact, over half our business units are now run by women. So we've had a sort of very dedicated programme of thinking about talent, diversity, representation of our communities. And then we've actually said, what's a better purpose than serving customers with the essential energy they need to live their lives and guiding them through this energy transition to a sort of clean energy future, clean air, leaving something better behind for future generations to come. So I think we tend to attract women and we tend to retain women. And
because of that
purpose, and I think purpose is massive. I totally agree with you. And one of the reasons I actually came to Grid was 10 years ago was because the purpose was so compelling. But it's interesting what you say about keeping women in the workplace and feeling fulfilled and being your real self at work with the revolt. And that's why this collaboration we thought would be so valuable, because actually until you start talking about this and bringing this population together, you kind of feel that you're on your own. You're not clear where you stand. So, have I got the courage, or have I got the environment around me to share the wisdom and the challenge and the
which is not nothing, because actually a lot of women leave because they just think, I just don't want to go on trimming. We all know that sense of trimming who we really are to the kind of environment, and I think as women we do that a lot. And I think that is one of the things that queenagers just like, well, no, if I can't really be myself and bring my purpose and my full self to work, then I'm going to go and do something else where I can.
So how do we encourage that? How do we create those environments? And then you've done something I think really fabulous, which we're about to launch, which is noon circles, because actually you've got to sort of find your new crew to look, I think. And it'd be lovely for you to talk a little bit about that, because when you start realizing and becoming a queenager, your true identity, and you talk to other queenagers, they're learning opportunity, the support network. It's just amazing. And it's that untouched thing, because also back to your references to media and how Disney's portrayed it's not been the natural go-to place.
No, and I think particularly actually within business, there was a sense, certainly when we started out, that there was room for one woman at the table, and that therefore all women were fighting each other to get this kind of one coveted spot. And I think that, I think that's changed. I remember a long time ago writing a column about what Queen Bee syndrome, so that kind of Margaret Thatcher way of acting, that a lot of the women who made it through in the early days when things were really tough was to define themselves as not like other women. And as a kind of exceptional, and to put down the other women around them. And I think it's very important to kind of, call that out and name it, because I think what we're seeing now is a very different kind of women coming through who are much more collaborative. There was a big study done in the Dutch police of how when you got to a certain level, if a third of the organisation became female, collaborative behaviours became a much better way of getting on, and actually sort of stopped seeing Queen Bee behaviour because it was kind of pointless. So I don't think we should necessarily blame the individual women who did that. I think it was a survival mechanism. My aunt, Barbara Mills, was the first director of public prosecutions who was a woman. And she was famously asked on Women's Hour if you got to be kind of in court with your wig on, or she's had 4 kids, at hospital with your child, what do you do? And she said, I'd be in court with my wig on, but I'd go to the hospital immediately afterwards. But of course, the only thing that was reported was I'd be in court with my wig on. So there's a kind of, in Germany, they call it the Ravensmutter, the kind of working mum who kind of abandons her young. So I think that there's been a lot of that kind of in the culture, which we need to kind of get over. And also what we see in the Noon Circle, and why I set them up. So just to give you a bit of context on this, so I left the Sunday Times and I set up Noon, and I started writing. I've always been a writer. I've written a book actually now called Much More to Come, if you're interested.
I'm halfway through.
Yes, says Helen too. They're very, very sweetly. So that kind of explores the queenager journey. But the first thing that I started to do when I had this newsletter and it started really gathering pace was I invited women to come to actually it's my mother's flat in Soho, but she's not in London most of the time. And then come, and I just invited people to come. And we created this absolutely magic circle, because what we discovered was that when the women come and they're all at this phase in life, they're all queenagers, and everybody has been through some kind of big loss, really, whether it's kind of professional or personal, something that you thought was going to work out in your life and hasn't. So there's that. Jen's laughing, but it's so true. And you sit round the circle and you hear this, and then you also hear from the women the sense of they all feel that they're not enough in some way. There's a real kind of massive sense of lack. And there's a sense that they're not seen, and there's a kind of sadness. And then what you suddenly see happen is this kind of magic alchemy, which is something like, well, hang on a sec. you're bloody amazing, you know, and you're feeling like this, and that they suddenly begin to see that it's not each of their personal lack or kind of use. They're not at all useless. They may be feeling a bit like that, but they really aren't. And seeing it, you realise it's systemic, that it's something that we're all being made to feel rather than it actually being kind of true individually. And then you get this amazing kind of, you know, upspring of energy and support, and so many friendships formed. And I think what's amazing about this period is that it is a pivot point. We hear in the culture about midlife crisis, and everyone thinks it's like, you know, men running off with their secretaries or buying a Ferrari. But I think that there's also something very true about this point as a shedding, or a kind of realization that a bit of your life, one phase is over and a new phase is beginning, and that we can get really excited about the new phase, even as we kind of mourn some of the things which go from the kind of 25 to 50 bit, but that we are moving into a really exciting new phase, which is also the absolute dividend of longevity. Because there haven't been women who've hit 50 before with the like kind of lifespan, health span, you know, the kind of money span, the kind of choices that we have at this point. And we really need to model that for the generation coming up behind us. So what the Noon Circle does is it kind of alchemizes it, like it kind of turbocharges this incredible energy in the room and creates a supportive network for women to become something new. And that's, I mean, I've really done that myself. I was a journalist and I've become an entrepreneur and a speaker and an author at 50. And I see so many other women moving into their next phase. You know, whether that's a big corporate job, or it's like setting up a business, or it's going back to study, or and I think, and we also very aware that nearly a third of women in this cohort, particularly the university educated ones, don't have children. So it's really high. I mean, in the population as a whole, it's between 20 and 25%. And then the more educated you are and the more high-powered your job, the less likely you are to be a mum. So we're also really interested in the experiences of the child-free and this sense of moving into purpose and legacy and making this point count. And what that looks like, I think, is particularly pertinent for them. And then to go back to the original point about the kind of financial clout, the child-free, or I was in a focus group with some of them. One woman said to me, I'm a partner in a law firm, I'm 50, I don't have any kids. She said, I'm disposable income arama. And no brands talk to me at all. Just completely invisible in the culture. So we're very aware of those women too, and we try to be very inclusive in everything we do, because of course all of this, there's a massive intersectionality, which in some ways is quite interesting, because Black women tend to have less of this kind of queenager self-doubt than white ones. In fact, the word queenager came from, partly came from one of our focus groups, where one of the women said, I feel like I'm a teenager, but in my own house with posh sheets and nice tea. So that kind of got me going on this like kind of teenager. And I spend a lot of time in Jamaica, where they talk about women a lot as queens, particularly the older women, and the older women run everything. You know,
and that's known authority, isn't it, as well?
It's like known,
promoted within.
Yes, absolutely, and they have deep respect. And I really saw it. We were playing pickleball, which I have to sound very bad at. It's like a kind of version of tennis on a small court. With and I was playing with like four other kind of teenagers and Jamaican ladies, and there were about 40 young men who were all playing football and were kicking the ball against the side of the thing. And one of them she just went out and she asked very gently. She was just like, do you think you can, I won't do the accent, do you think you can kind of kick your ball to the other end of the pitch so you're not annoying us? Instantly, they all stopped. And I thought, wow, in a London park, as a 50-year-old woman, if I turned to like 40 youths and said, can you kind of play your game the other way? I don't think they would have done what I'd said. So I do think that the intersectionality on a lot of this is really interesting.
We've got, and I know we're going to open the floodgates hopefully for questions in a minute. So, you know, we've got this really fantastic opportunity working with Eleanor and the Noon organisation. We've got our own place on your platform.
Yes.
There will be quarterly sort of newsletters that are relevant to the National Grid queenagers. And really, we're starting to create these Noon circles so that we're creating a broader network for women in National Grid, you know, at this stage of life. And I think, you know, we're sort of inviting now deeper conversation about this amongst our National Grid population. So we do want everybody to get warmed up for Q&A, and I don't know if the stuff's coming in for chat.
You've got a hand up. So
And I know Eleanor was going to warm us up by asking me a couple as well.
Yeah.
Hello. Yeah, Julia's good.
Hey,
You're
go
up for it.
Julia.
Let's go for it.
Hello, hi. Thank you for coming over today and presenting this great fire chat for us, Eleanor and Cordi. Really interesting, and Eleanor, really fascinating. And I'm really enjoying the success story of how you reinvented yourself after that, you know, such a change in your life. So it's very inspiring. And I wanted to ask Cordi yourself as well. In this stage of life, have you had a situation where you feel like you had to reinvent yourself? Although maybe not as drastically as Eleanor from one profession to another, but I suppose that there were some pinch points that you had to deal with as well.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I've had as dramatic a reinvention. I mean, I'm pretty boring, right? I've been in the energy industry for 27 years, and I'm kind of in my third company. So, and I've experienced exactly what you did in the early. I was the only woman in the room.
Yeah.
For nearly 2 decades.
Yeah.
In fact, it was only when I came to National Grid that I had to queue up in the loos one day, and I thought, oh my God, there is women here. That's amazing.
I love that.
And it was sort of like, oh, am I going to be okay? Because I guess I'd subconsciously modified behaviours, the way I looked, because I was fitting in with a cohort of men. So I look back now and I kind of like, you know, I'm wearing my pink jacket today, which I love, you know, whereas I would never have dreamt of, I was in Thomas Pink shirts and matching cufflinks. I mean, I was.
Oh, wow. Did you look like a bloke?
Literally look like a bloke. Yeah, because I was a trader. And whilst I thought it, and then I'd read the papers to look at the football results, you know, and I have no interest. And it was literally because this is going to be my world for the next 12 hours of the working day or however long. And actually, as a woman surviving in that, I never went through that alpha phase. I must destroy others in order to preserve my one spot.
Yes.
But I definitely, you know, really did hide features of my femininity physically, and also didn't open up the dialogue to other topics because there was no one else to sort of talk to.
Yeah.
And what I found, one of the big transformations, which sounds really, you know, little, but actually I thought was quite big, was coming to National Grid, and I changed the way I dressed. For the first time I thought, because I arrived and I was like, oh, there's women here and there's individual and in a regulated business as well. I was like, wow, this is like really cool.
This is cool.
Not what I was expecting. And I think over the decade I've been here, that's been even easier, and actually very different leadership styles have become part of the norm now, which feels good. And yes, we're still.
So how would you say that the leadership styles had changed? I mean, certainly. I mean, I worked in an industry which really is like the kind of last bastion of like total machismo. So in newspapers, there's an editor who's like an emperor, whose kind of word is law. You know, anything that you can be killed at any moment by like one scowl from the emperor. It really is the last kind of total like triangular thing, and I think they're having trouble with that because it's so top down.
Well, we've been on a journey because quite naturally, if you think about running an electricity system, you know, you're from the Central Electric Generating Board, you've got a legacy of central command and control.
Yeah.
You have come from largely a historic male engineering population.
Yeah.
It could be sort of quite black and white, what's right, what's wrong. You know, we're designed for things to work, they never break down, we're highly resilient, you know. And so we've had to evolve in terms of our thinking styles and the way we've brought new people into the organisation, because our whole energy system is under transformation.
Yes.
The customers got closer to us. There's all this distributed energy and new players. And so our character over time has become more purpose-driven. We've always had a high driver for care.
Yes.
But we were over-indexed on control.
Yeah.
Versus sort of results orientation. When you move to, I think, results orientation, all of a sudden the sort of world opens up, because you get out of this presenteeism.
Yeah. Jacket on the back.
Jacket on. We're here for, you know, we've been able to adopt the most flexible sort of hybrid working policies. That's then encouraged. We need diversity of thought. We need to start broadening our talent pools. We're nowhere near done.
Yeah.
But then you reach a sort of tipping point, I think, when you've got you know, we're 25% female, but at the senior leadership group, our top 110, and we're 48%.
Yeah, that makes a difference.
It's just it's a leveler on collaboration. Collaboration has come through a lot more than command and control. But I'd still say when I speak to peers and colleagues in my age category, we still don't feel as visible.
Yeah,
probably. So I guess my big transition was coming out of the sort of corporate world, being dressing like a man, fitting in, because that was the norm, to recognising a bit of individuality, femininity, and going on this journey with National Grid. Right now, you know, the wheels fell off. I told my team about a month ago, because I'm the sandwich generation.
Yeah.
So I've got my teenage son doing GCSEs and getting into all sorts of trouble and anxieties online. And then I've got my husband's parents, who literally live 5 doors down, with my father-in-law is 89, who probably has dementia, but would say the D word, or his wife don't.
Yeah.
And so that's been a sort of an emerging, wow, this is quite a deep set of problems.
Yeah.
And then, you know, all of a sudden, because you want to be supportive and help, you're sort of trying to get your son out of a sticky wicket at school. In the same week, you're trying to convince your in-laws to sell and move into retirement home to get the essential support they need, because, you know, your husband's near collapse, having to go every day trying to sort it all out.
Yes.
So I'd say that there's moments of intensity.
Yes.
And add a nice menopausal sort of moment in there just for kicks. And it's not that it's life-shattering, but there are moments when you're just like, wow, this is intense. This is intense, and you know, am I going to keep it all together?
Yes.
And where am I willing to show up at work about this versus put on the brave face?
And I think that's also where a shift has come. I mean, certainly when I first went back to work after I'd had my eldest daughter, I had a big picture of her on my desk, and I can remember someone coming into my office and going, "Oh, you can't have a picture of your daughter on your desk. They'll think you're not serious, or they'll think you'd rather be at home with your daughter." And I was like, well, quite a lot of me would actually rather be at home with my daughter, because it was so grim when I got back from maternity leave. So I think that also being able to kind of talk about these things is really important. And I think that there's much more of a conversation now, which is really good. And I think as female leaders, that's something that we can very much encourage. And I always did, and I used to do that because I would come in and say, oh, you know, I was up all night with my daughter, or this happened, or I'd have the pictures on my desk. And I thought, actually, I can be really good at my job, and I can still be a human being. Yeah. And that's, I think, the kind of the shift. I think a lot of the women who were around when I first entered the profession had absolutely mastered the art of kind of pretending that they weren't mothers, exactly the thing of kind of trying to be like the men. And I think one of the shifts that we can do, which helps everyone and helps the men too, is really model the humanity of, actually, you know, my husband's in a total state because he's been looking after his mum all night, and my daughter's my minor at university, but you know, it goes on. You get the kind of call, and just being able to show up as fully rounded humans. Yeah, I think it's really important. And then your team can too. And what I also always knew as a manager is, if you say to somebody, I let my male designer work, or I encouraged him to work 4 days a week, because he was having he had a daughter who was very ill. And I knew that he would do anything for me to get the paper out, because he was so appreciative of the fact that he had been allowed to do that, and he had some flexibility, and he could get to the hospital and see her. So I also think, in terms of, there's this terrible kind of, you know, in some companies there can be a sense of, you know, if you're not at your desk, you're kind of, you know, you're not committed, or the flexibility means that you're not keen. I think absolutely the opposite, that when you go the extra mile for someone in your team, they repay that with, you know, loyalty, hard work, you know, which is way bigger than any kind of bone you've thrown them as a manager. And I believe that.
And being authentic to what's going on, I think, it never takes. I think this is a tricky thing, that sometimes it's perceived as taking away ambition, competence, and it actually isn't. It's another ability to connect with people.
Absolutely.
To be a human leader.
And you know, we're all human beings. And what I was looking at some stuff. I wrote an article in The Independent last week about all that Elon Musk stuff. He was saying only one alpha males should be allowed to run the world. And I wrote a piece which was basically going, yeah, because that's worked so well. You know, slavery, colonialism, you know, wars, you know, that's been a real hit, hasn't it? But and actually, what I discovered when I was rehearsing that, when I was writing that piece, when I was researching it, was that there's a massive study from the Harvard Business Review which shows actually that queenagers, senior women, are the best at managing complex change. Partly because we've been through all this stuff where you're trying to juggle, you know, your son's GCSEs, your father-in-law's dementia, kind of, you know, how on earth you're going to get through your big meeting that day, whatever. And that the ability to keep lots of those things, all those balls in the air, but also more than that, to really be able to prioritize what's important in a very difficult and shifting landscape is actually probably the skill which is most important at a time when the whole world and all our systems are in a state of maximum transition and flux. You know, that being able to see the thread through those things or catch the ball that's actually really important at that point, which we all do as, you know, as women who've got complex caring needs. And we can often be carers, you know, even if we're not parents, we've all got parents or we have people who depend on us. And that actually that capacity to do that is incredibly important and valuable to the companies of which we're a part.
Yes. So thank you, Julia. Hopefully that was
insightful.
Thank you. I've actually seen in the chat, Emily commented that I don't think I can imagine Cordi in black and navy. She's nothing but color to me.
Thank you. So let's see if we've got some more questions either in the chat or with folks' hands up.
I think a key thing that I'm getting feedback, not necessarily today, but if I'm not a queenager, how, you know, I think it's great to be part of this group to understand what may come.
Yes.
And how I can prepare myself for it.
And we see that with everybody. So what's really been interesting with the book is loads of people writing to me going, oh, now I really understand my mum, or I really understand my auntie, or I understand my boss, or just a kind of sense of these things coalescing. And more importantly, I think when I speak to younger women about this work, is this sense of the runway being extended. So the thing that I've really been fighting against is this sense that, you know, men age like fine wine, silver foxes, getting better with age, you know, all that George Clooney rubbish. Whereas women have a sell by day, you know, they age like peaches, one wrinkle, and we're done. You know? And that has got to be challenged because it's total rubbish. And I also think that getting rid of that, and that is hitting women at an earlier and earlier stage. I mean, I'm terrified by some friends I have who say that their kind of 20-something children are getting Botox and things, partly because of Instagram and filters and that sense of always being on camera. And so I think it's incredibly important that we challenge this sense that women are valued only in their kind of youthful, kind of fecund time, particularly as we're living so much longer. I mean, it's completely ridiculous that in the 100-year life where, you know, women would only be valued in their 20s, that men have a full life, women have a shelf life. And I think that's something that, for me, that's one of the really important next bastions of feminism, which has to be kind of tackled. And I think by saying and demonstrating that we come into our prime at 50, that, you know, actually I'm having more fun as a queenager than I've ever had in my life. I felt confident, I felt powerful, really in charge of my life in a way that I didn't when I was younger. And modelling that also makes the younger women look forward to this stage rather than dreading it. I want, you know, all younger women to look forward to being 50 as when they become a queenager, and it's when it gets good. You know, think about what a change that would create within our culture if that was, if that was
you've described like different chapters now, haven't you? So
yes.
So we elongate our thinking.
Yeah.
We really stretch our sort of ambition. Once we
Yes.
hit this midpoint where we have the spending power, we have all this resilience, these life skills.
Yeah.
We have the courage.
Yeah.
And the gut to challenge and to think. And so actually, you know, we're not stuck in a decline mode at all, which has been the sort of
which is
normalised.
Yeah. So there was I don't know if any of you have been following this on LinkedIn, but there's been this big fuss about this Indeed post. I'm sure some of you have got jobs through Indeed. So Indeed did this post which said basically that I think from about 45 plus you were just in decline.
Yeah.
And I'm glad to say that it's caused an absolute uproar, kind of outrage, because in the 100-year life, which statistically many of us are going to be lucky enough to live, particularly the people who are in their 20s now, to say that at 45 you're in decline, I mean, what does everyone think we're going to be doing for the next kind of half of our lives? So there's this like fundamental shift. I mean, you talked about the kind of shift to green energy, and that kind of climate change shift is like massive. It's hugely important. There's a massive shift going on around AI and how we can all use those kind of technologies in the work that we do. But I think as fundamental is this longevity shift, and how as a culture we need to rethink all those landmarks. You know, that old sense of get educated, you know, go and work somewhere for like, you know, 30 years, retire, you know, go to the golf course, dead by 70. Man has about 70 years in 10. That's just so not how our lives work now. And I think that in the 100-year life, we need to think about this. And, you know, my great friend Aviva Wittenberg Cox talks about 4-quarter lives, and the sense of 0 to 25 being when we kind of get educated, we kind of go out into the world. She calls it grow. 25 to 50 is I see really as achieve. It's kind of when we're ticking all the boxes that we've been told to kind of tick by our parents or by society, or whether that's getting a job or getting a house or maybe having some kids, or, you know, whatever that might be. But actually, there's this whole new bit at 50, which for me is about becoming. The 50 to 75 is this kind of becoming bit. It's when you've ticked all the boxes of those achievement years, which I think for too many women can just feel like survival years. You know, how can I kind of get through this? I remember, you know, times when my kids were small and I had a big job where I was so exhausted that I can't really remember things. I look back on it. And I think that this point of 50, this sense of becoming, is finally having done all the things for everyone else. You get a chance to go, well, who am I? What do I want? What could this period of my life look like? I'm being blessed with this 50 to 75 bit where I've still got my health and I'm active and I've maybe got some money and I've got some confidence and some experience. What can that be? And getting excited about that chunk of life rather than seeing it as decline. And then, you know, 75 to 100, okay, maybe that's, Aviva calls that harvest. I told my dad about that, and he went, darling, it's just die. That was a bit grim. But, you know, but that bit, you know, that 50 to 75 bit is that really special thing that our generation's been gifted. And so I think we should be getting excited about this. It's the time of becoming, not feeling like we're on the scrap heap. Which is a headline that somebody really kindly put on my first piece about being made redundant.
Right, what else have we got coming, Helen?
I think as well, people saying they're so grateful for this cohort, and they're not here, they feel like that's great because they're not here alone. And a question for you, Cordi has already mentioned that we are setting up our own noon circles within National Grid, and we'll be pushing them out through the organisation. Any advice on how we can make them most effective? Your experience, how we can get the best value out of them for us and our queenagers?
Well, one thing I'll do is I'll share with you my noon running a noon circle kind of playbook. And there's a good thing on the noon website actually called What to Expect from a Noon Circle. And I've got a kind of playbook of the people holding them, of things that come up, and we have some rules. So the first thing about the noon circle is that it's a completely safe space. What's said inside the noon circle stays inside the noon circle. And what I think is really, really wonderful, and what we see in the comments here, and we see all the time, is that often women in this space are articulating something for the first time. That you get this absolute magic in the room where they go, when I was talking about kind of people not feeling alone, is suddenly going, wow, you know, everybody's feeling like this. Everyone's in this shift. Everyone's feeling like a bit lost, maybe. I'm hoping now more excited about the possibility of what can come. I call my book Much More to Come because I wanted to really kind of land that. And what emerges in the Noon Circle is that this great sense of a shared experience, this sense that queenagers are forged in fire, and what we've all been through to get there. And I can see, I've been looking at the chat, that this thing about midlife collisions and everything hitting at once, we all feel that that's just happening to us, but actually it's happening to all of us because of the kind of the time and the point in life. But also what I've really discovered, and what I write about in my book, is that in the shedding of what was is this amazing possibility for something new to grow. And really what the circles do is they provide like a trellis of support while you try out what that shedding and that becoming can mean for you. And what's lovely about it, one of the things that we do on our noon retreats, because we now run a lot of retreats and events, and we do a book club, which you're all, going to be part of now, and all that kind of thing, is what we do. One of the exercises we do on the retreats, which is really powerful, Jen's done it, is we walk, we call it walking the labyrinth. And it sounds really, when you look at it, you go, well, that's not a labyrinth, it's hardly the Minotaur. But it's basically like a kind of a spiral of stones, and about 20 of us together walk in, and you walk round this labyrinth, and there's this sense of you're all kind of going in the same direction. You wind your way right into the middle and then out again. And we're all on the same journey. Some people are a bit ahead, some are a bit behind. And there's something wonderfully evocative, I think, of what happens in the Noon Circle, that some people have kind of gone through the transition and are a bit ahead and are going, oh, cooey, this is what it can look like. Others are just going in and maybe in that shedding phase and finding it tough, or they're in that collision. But there's this sense that everybody's going through it and winding round, and you see people who are further along, who are kind of lighting the way. And what I was trying to do with Noon and with the book and everything was to create a map, a kind of set of signposts, some white pebbles, if you like, out of the dark wood, to what might be possible if we dare to kind of, look up and dream of what this next bit can be.
And then for those who are further ahead, the support, encouragement,
exactly, and the
confidence that it could be something you could do as well.
Exactly, because you see someone, you go, and what's amazing about the Noon Circles, because I've been running them now for like 3 years, is I've seen these women go through it. So I see midlife not as a crisis, but as a chrysalis. That we kind of go in, you sit in the dark for a bit, and your chrysalis kind of working out what's going to come next, and with all the stuff coming at you, but actually come out, you emerge as this butterfly, your queenager butterfly, and that we can all help. What the Noon Circle's there to do is to kind of help you through the pinch points, the dark bits, into the next phase. So it's not saying there aren't tough bits about being a queenager. There really are. But if we support each other through them, there's this potential and this capacity for incredible transformation, metamorphosis, and a new phase.
We've got Diane. Thank you very much, Eleanor. We've got Diane. Would you like to come off mute and ask a question?
Sure. Greetings from New York City.
Look at your background.
My background, I'm in an apartment in Queens. I'm unfortunately not in Jamaica, which it looks like I am behind me, but
I was thinking of Jamaica. It looks amazing.
See, we could be anywhere we want to be.
Yeah.
I wanted to thank you both for both being such an inspiration. Cordi, we miss you over here in the States. You are still referenced regularly as an inspirational leader, and I think that says a lot. I was laughing when Cordi was saying about dressing in the charcoal grays and the navies and the blacks. I started working in banking in 1985, I guess. And that's all we wore. And I was thinking we have come a long way. There's way more to do, and appreciate the queenagers pushing us to it. But as I sit here now, I'm wearing a shirt that actually is a painting that I made when I turned 50. I gave myself the gift of taking a painting class at my daughter's suggestion, and she took one of my paintings and had it made into a shirt for me.
Aww.
So think about how far we've come, from being limited in what we could wear and having to act and dress like men to exploring our creativity and then wearing it proudly. So we've come a long way still to go. I do know a lot of women and men who particularly feel conscious about mentioning their age, making their age known. Particularly time of budget cuts, I think there's a fear that when people are looking to cut resources, they'll say maybe some of you older people just want to retire. And I know from working in the past that some of those decisions had been made based on that. And I was actually in a position to push back on it and stop it, which I was grateful for. But that is a real fear, especially in times when we are looking at budgets. So that's something I think to keep an eye on. And the other thing, I hope we'll do the social circles here over in the States as well. So impressive. I'm also I jump in on the menopause group that you guys started in the UK. Such an inspiration, that group and those women are. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for both of you for being examples, and for everybody who's on the call who obviously is committed to pushing us forward. So thank you.
It's lovely to see you. Thanks for showcasing your amazing artwork.
Oh, not the colours. No, I think that that's so right as well. Also, is that kind of going back to explore kind of one's creativity and the kind of possibility and just this sense of life kind of unfurling. You know, kind of getting bigger, not diminishing. A sense that it's opening out, and that's kind of what we're trying to encourage. In fact, I'm coming to America in March to launch the book in the States.
All right. Well, definitely make sure that we know where you're going to be, and I will be there cheering you on.
Thank you so much.
Thank you both.
Thank you. I think we've only got 3 minutes left, so if can we squeeze a couple more
to
in?
Gillian. Yeah. So Gillian saying, I've chosen your book to give out on Thursday to my book club. Thank you, Gillian. I love you. What sentence should I use to introduce your book, or what piece of advice should the girls have as they read the book? I mean, I think I just used the best phrase from it, which is that midlife's not a crisis, but a chrysalis. That's quite a good one to kind of kick off with. And also the sense that what our big noon phrases, there's not done yet. You know, never too old. It's never too late to become the woman that you want to be. And that actually life, you know, that Jungian phrase of life begins at 40. Until then, you're just doing research. I think that that's really true, that at 50 is when we become the women we always wanted to be. And that's really what the book is about. It's about the journey to that becoming and what that looks like. Because I absolutely, as a journalist, I used to absolutely hate more than anything when people would kind of go, oh, I was working city and now I'm a crofter in Scotland. And I go like, hang on a sec, rewind, you know, how did you get from here to here? And I'm interested in the real nitty gritty and the granularity of the change and what that looks like, what you have to do. So I think that what the book's intended to be is a bit of a manual for that kind of midlife becoming.
Excellent.
So if you explain it to them in that way, that kind of has a story to kind of tie it together, which hopefully makes it a bit more fun. But that's really what it's trying to do. And you can dip in and out of it to what you find interesting. But thank you so much for doing that. I appreciate it. And come to one of our, you know, come to Noon, come and explore what's on there, all of you, because we've got book clubs, we've got events, we've got retreats. There's lots of stuff that we're doing for you as National Grid, but also as part of our National Grid Noon partnership, you can kind of be part of lots of the other stuff. We've been doing a lot of things around queenager finances. Really important to get those in order. We've got a whole load of free webinars. We've got Baroness Helena Morrissey coming to talk to us about that. And we've also got a big party which you can come to in London on the 8th of October. So have a look, do kind of get into the hub. We've created this National Grid bit of the Noon website, especially for you. And there's lots of good stuff on there. So come and, you know, come and join in.
Well, I love the fact that we're going to end on a party. So so I think we've had an amazing hour. It's flown by. You're an inspiration as always. You've given us so much energy, encouragement, positivity. We are not done and we're only just starting, right? And that goes for our partnership, our collaboration. So creating all of these enabling activities now to bring us together to create that sort of sense of change, identity, for a really, really important population within National Grid. So absolutely, thank you so much for having us.
And thank you for being really spearheading this, because you're our first kind of corporate partnership. And
you know, thank all my wing.
It's amazing wing. But you know, I think it's really a sign that National Grid's really, you know, means it in terms of the diversity and the inclusion, that you're seeing your queenagers and doing something for them. Makes you real pioneers. So thank you.
Excellent. And so please do promote this conversation across the organisation. I think we're going to create some materials around this. Obviously, we'll have our own Noon section on the hub, and we'll start the work on the circles. So, and you know, I think Eleanor's really encouraged us to sort of get out there, check out what else is going on in Noon and how we can participate and get involved. So have a great day, everybody. Take care. Stay safe.